Thanks so much, Jeff. It's a delight to be here, and I'm really honored to be speaking to this group. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. Elon is in North Carolina, so I'm in the East Coast of the United States, and I I've been thinking a lot about the arrival of AI in the public imagination, starting with the release of ChatGPT in November of 2022. Of course, one of the striking things about the artificial intelligence revolution is it actually predates the internet revolution. We are actually in year 72 of AI being a part of life as the computer community and the information informatics community was long thinking about the arrival of artificial tools coming into people's lives, enabled by the digitization of information and the increasing power that is invested in computers and computation. So there's a little bit of a dispute about when AI began, but I'm going to pick the year 1952 because it was the time when the first self-learning checkers program came into being, and it was pretty good. Just like Deep Blue eventually beat Gary Kasparov in chess, and then DeepMind beat Go in the Asian popular game. Checkers was the first computerized game, and it was intuitive and it learned and things like that. There was also a couple of years later a logical theorist tool that was built around human problem solving. Again, it was looking at games first and foremost, but it was looking to figure out how to learn from its own environment and improve its own performance over time. And then something resembling a language model came into existence in the mid 1960s. You might remember, those of you of a certain age, the ELIZA chatbot, which was really just modeled after cognitive behavioral therapy and the kind of responses that normal therapists who use that to a set of tools were dealing with patients, often asking, well, why do you think that? Or why are you experiencing that? Or what do you think is going on? So it really wasn't reacting to the direct content of observers, but it was responding in programmatic ways to what people were telling it. And it looked pretty good. You know, people did use it for therapeutic purposes. One of the preserved exchanges was from ELIZA and a woman who was feeling pretty stressed out by her boyfriend because he kept asking her to go to therapy, and she started her engagement with ELIZA talking about why men are alike and why they're always bugging out about something or another. So this kind of stuff has been around for a while, but of course, one of the distinguishing elements of the artificial intelligence era was that there was a long AI winter, really from the late 1950s into really the last decade. Not much progress was being made, even though the early hopes were quite dramatic, and there were pretty short timelines as people were beginning to predict the rollout of AI as they were thinking about it in the mid 1950s and early 1960s. But of course, now we've had this breakthrough in computation and neural networks and machine learning and things like that. So we're already in the thick of the artificial intelligence age. Just to remind you, these are a variety of ways that AI is already at work in people's lives. And I've got to say that one of the most interesting, challenging parts of being a researcher in this era is that people are using artificial intelligence, but not aware of it. They haven't developed the technology terminology really to think about it, even though the technology itself is deeply serving their purposes. So we're already using smart assistants, Siri and Alexa. And of course, one of the big predictions about 2024, 2025, 2026 is that smart assistants are going to become ubiquitous. And many people, particularly in work environments, are going to think about using assistants to help them do their jobs. Already there are beginning studies about how people are using chat models, LLMs, to help them become more efficient, to help them become more proficient in the things that they're doing. And so we're in the era of the agentization of AI, and it's going to look very dramatically different just in the next couple of years. Of course, anytime you log on to buy a book, you get recommendations, and now it's in music and things like that. People who like this, like that, or now from your history that we see you purchasing things, these are recommended books and music and pieces of art and other kinds of content that you might like. We've got semi-autonomous vehicles riding the roads now. Even in a couple of cities in the United States, there are fully autonomous vehicles that are riding around based on AI systems. Fraud detection has been a long practiced application of AI. If you've ever gotten a message from your bank or your credit card company saying, there are strange purchasing things happening in your life, are you sure this is you? That's been generated by an AI system that knows you well enough to know that something might be amiss in your systems. Of course, we've got personalized learning systems now, self-taught, self-actuated systems. Customer service now is often starts with AI chatbots. Facial recognition is rolling out and being used in a variety of ways around the world, especially by law enforcement and national security systems. Translation is now a huge part of AI applications in the world, and there are increasing numbers of healthcare and medical diagnostics tools, even treatment recommendations and things like that. And of course, public health systems are now building a lot of their monitoring of populations through AI applications. So we're in the thick of this now, even though it feels like it's really new. In fact, it's quite a common part of life, and it's worth remembering. This is what the AI ecosystem looks like in at least one rendering of it. And it's a robust thing that obviously has enormous commercial applications, but also social, governmental, and other kinds of applications. The only reason to show you this slide is to show you how ubiquitous, how big, how transformative a lot of companies think it's going to be in our lives, particularly in our work lives and our commercial lives. So I thought it would be interesting to walk through some of the stuff that's going to feel familiar about the increasing use of AI in people's lives. There's a long-standing body of research about the adoption of innovation in people's lives, and it follows very predictable patterns, whether it's new agricultural methods, whether it's new technologies, whether it's new norms in communities and things like that. There's a very common way, it's an S-curve, that adoption plays out in populations. This is the standard model that Everett Rogers has now enshrined and been embraced and studied in voluminous numbers of contexts. You get, the innovators are a small fraction of the population, but the people who are building the stuff and adding on to the building of stuff. So you can think of computer developers and as part of that community. The early adopters are people who begin to see it, and they're the ones who will wait in long lines to make sure they get the newest iPhone. And to just because they're interested in stuff, they don't necessarily have to see that it's valuable in a dramatic empirical sense. They just need to be on the cutting edge of things. And that brings you up to about 17% of the population, 18% of the population. Then you get the early majority. And Malcolm Gladwell, of course, enshrined the idea that you reach a tipping point with about 17 to 20% of the population, 21, 22% of the population. If once they have embraced a technology, it's the takeoff point. It's when it becomes a widely used technology. It's built into the common practices and principles of people's everyday lives. And right now, the most recent survey we did at the Imagining the Digital Future Center was that 23 of United States adults use language models, at least modestly. Of course, that's going to grow relatively rapidly. One of the most striking things about the release of ChatGPT came out in late November 2022. By February 2023, so less than 3 months later, 100 million people were using it. We hadn't ever seen an adoption curve that looked like that. It's a straight up hockey stick, basically. And even the rollout of broadband and certain kinds of social media apps and stuff like that, they were dramatically embraced by the population, but nothing at this level of uptake has ever been seen in the world. And so we're heading up to the top of that S curve relatively rapidly, is my guess. One of the other things that happens as technology rolls out, of course, the divides are inevitable and distressing. There are ways in which already we're beginning to see divides related to AI, particularly in business applications. Companies that are embracing it, universities that are embracing it, are encouraging their workers and their students to get with the new systems and check them out. It's not necessarily they're endorsing them, but it's just like their sense that these things are inevitable in people's lives heading into the future, and using them now and figuring out what they're like is going to be a competitive advantage for workers, as students, and just for human beings. And so there are ways in which people who are not as well resourced, not as well educated, not as well adapted to the early use of technologies, they're going to get left behind. One of the theories about the rollout of AI is it's going to empower people even more quickly than other previous digital technologies did. So those who are early adopters are going to get an ever bigger advantage over the later adopters of the technology. And this is going to make things worse in terms of, certainly in terms of wealth and income equality and things like that. The drivers of the adoption are going to look like the drivers of adoption in the past. It makes you more efficient. It helps. It saves time, energy, and purpose. That life gets safer sometimes when you use these technologies, and of course, convenience itself is one of the high motivations of people adopting it. So those old incentives to adopt technology are going to look very similar in the AI world. And then there will be a really interesting interplay between humans and the technology. Often the inventors of a technology think one thing will happen once it becomes popularly embraced, but users adopt technologies for their own purposes. Edison thought that the use of the phonograph was going to help business applications. He had no sense that there was going to be artistic creativity enhanced by it, that the whole industries would be built up around creativity and entertainment. That's often going to be the case with other technologies, and it might be the case here. So that's what's same about the LLMs. What's different about the artificial intelligence revolution, particularly compared with the previous digital revolutions, it's already being built, even though people aren't necessarily opting into using it. I mean, the striking thing that's happened in the past couple of months is a bunch of companies have built AI already into very commonly used systems like email and document creation. Increasingly now it's available in creativity kinds of enterprises. And one of the things that is likely to happen in the not distant future, and in some respects it's happening now, is that these technologies will feel like wallpaper in people's lives. They won't necessarily know they're using them, though they are quite abundantly using them, and it'll feel like electricity in people's lives rather than something that is purposeful and that they've directly opted into using. And one of the striking things about this era, of course, that it's taking the informatics portion of the revolution is coincident with a nanotechnology revolution, a biology and genetic revolution, and a cognitive revolution. We're studying the brain in ways that are just incredibly important and revealing. And one of the concerns, of course, about how we manage AI is whether we have the capacity as societies to handle all these four gigantic revolutions at the same time. Usually we're dealing with one revolution at a time. The problems that revolution causes, let's take, the Industrial Revolution and steam engines and factories. It took a couple of decades before the true problems of the Industrial Revolution, child labor, abuse of all kinds of workers, environmental externalities and things like that, took generations for those to be recognized and fixed and regulated by their societies. Now we've got 4 of these revolutions that are pressing in on people. And there are also going to be revolutions that sort of mix and combine these AI revolutions. So I cite here human enhancements. We now are seeing brain implants and things like that, new interfaces with both the new AI goggles and artificial reality and augmented reality goggles coming out. And then virtual reality, where data, both synthetic data and real data, are being embedded in environments in ways that we can access through our glasses or our goggles or our brains. And so the enrichment of environments through data is coming out. And so there's this very pressing and disorienting sense that this is all around us now in ways that we hadn't been thinking about certainly 10 or 15 years ago. So one of the striking things that's happened as AI has rolled out is that there are ways in which the dramatic changes introduced by machine learning and neural networks and the rise of language models themselves is prompting some research with the within the AI community about what's ahead. You might have seen reference to a major study organized by social scientists at University of California in Berkeley. 2,700 experts were asked to predict what will happen in the future. And here are some of the timelines that they gave. By 2026, an AI system will win the World Series of Poker. The reason that that's notable is that a successful AI system in a poker environment is going to have to figure out when to bluff. It's going to have to figure out, in some respects, what have a theory of mind, or something looking like a theory of mind, and what the other players are doing and thinking, and whether they're bluffing or not. So this is a really pretty significant leap in the cognitive capacity of the systems. The next year, it's going to AI systems. These experts think will convincingly write will mimic a song by a popular artist. And then by 2031, write an original Pop 40 song, and a best-selling novel will soon follow on the heels of that. Again, a novel written by an AI system entirely. By the year 2030, AI systems will be able to fold laundry. The major significance of that, besides just everybody cheering and giving it a standing ovation, would be that the level of dexterity and sensitivity in the manipulation systems, the robotic systems that are going to do that, has to be very, very sophisticated. Right now, AI systems still knock down doors and break things when they're going for it. They're getting better. But in a couple of years, they think that the systems are going to be so sophisticated they will be able to manipulate very delicate kinds of products and services. By 2033, a retail salesperson's job functions will be fully automated. In other words, retail salespeople will be facing computers and robotics that do their jobs almost in their entirety. By 2035, an AI system will write a high-quality machine learning paper on its own, according to these predictions. By 2040, AI systems will be able to physically install electric wiring in new homes. Of course, one of the theories of the modern moment is that things that require human dexterity, human manipulation of the world, still have enormous advantages over AI systems. They don't perform terribly well, but in a not distant future, these AI experts think that building a house won't be that hard for them. They'll be able to prove math theorems from the top math journal, which is sort of a metric that really matters to these AI experts because they're all math prodigies. By 2050, we'll solve longstanding unsolved problem in math and win the Millennium Prize, which for math is like winning the Nobel Prize. One of the major takeaways from the survey that was done this year, compared with prior surveys of this same population of AI experts, is that they asked about the same tasks, and the timelines for some of these things that I've just listed here has shrunk. They will happen. Experts are now thinking they will happen sooner than they earlier had predicted. And the two giant things that are asked in this survey is about high-level machine intelligence, which is basically general artificial intelligence. by their definition, this HLMI is better and cheaper to implement than humans. That will happen by the year 2040 in their consensus estimate, which is down 13 years from previous predictions. And then by 2016, really basically the same thing, although they think the timeline will be longer. Full automation of all known labor now will happen by about a century from now, a little less than a century from now. And their prediction was, again, down almost a half century from the ways that they've been thinking about it in previous surveys. At our center, we've asked we've asked the general public. These are general public representative of United States adults. We've asked them about the impacts of these systems and whether things will be far more negative than positive, far more positive than negative, equally positive and negative, not have much impact at all, and not sure. And of course, you can see next to these horizontal lines here, there's still a lot of people who are not even sure what's going on and what will likely happen in some of these areas. But I just want to highlight that some of the main things that people are concerned about, this is the general population, is the impact of AI on politics and elections. This is, of course, the Super Bowl year for democracy around the world. More people are going to be voting in democratic elections this year than ever in history. And then, things that are particularly important to this audience, they're a little bit more negative than positive when it comes to thinking about the AI's impact on primary and secondary schools and colleges and universities. Interestingly enough, the experts that we asked to sort of parallel questions, not a scientific sample, but it's a pretty good diverse sample of experts. Their views about the impact of AI on primary schools and on colleges and universities is the opposite. They think it'll be more positive than negative by a modest margin. It's not overwhelming. But there's interesting difference between elite opinion and the opinion of ordinary citizens on those big issues. And then the one thing that they hope for and think that it'll end up more positively than negatively is the healthcare systems and the quality of medical treatment. So that's one of the ways in which the title of this survey, or the title of this presentation, a new age of enlightenment, they think, the healthcare benefits are going to be pretty substantial in the coming years. We also asked about personal lives, and I just want to point out that privacy is a big concern for the general population, and employment, jobs, obviously one of the main things that you all are thinking about at this conference is the implication of education for jobs and people's preparedness, your students' preparedness for the world of work that's to come. So people are highly concerned about the negative impacts on employment. The reason I linked down to that second thing there, people's day-to-day work tasks and activities, is that even as they're worried about employment, they think it's a pretty split possibility that the day-to-day stuff that they can already see themselves doing, or they can already imagine themselves doing with AI, there are some positive, beneficial things to think about it, as well as some potentially negative things. And of course, one of the big things that's related to that judgment on the previous slide about politics is that there's widespread concern about people's access to accurate information. There's a sense that AI abuses, misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes, and things like that is going to be an important part of life, and sort of one of the literacies that the public generally hopes that universities will bring to their students is how to figure out the crap stuff from the good stuff, and not build their lives around fake information and information that is going to lead them astray, but other high quality information. So as I was beginning to think about the impact on higher education in particular, I thought I'd create a Dolly image around this. And it's still a work in progress. I guess I could have prompted this beyond 8 times. This is an 8 prompted version of what's going to happen. And I wanted it to sort of personify or show the idea that there would be a revolutionary impact across the board in higher education on universities. And it's I don't know, it looks kind of lame to me, and it looks kind of amateurish and things like that. And it's, in a way, it's kind of amazing that I can do this in the first place. But it was frustrating to me to try to work with AI to do something that I couldn't find in my normal inventory of images. And just to point out that prompt engineering is still an art more than it's a science, and it's interesting. But I thought I'd highlight three broad ways that the rise of language models in particular would affect education. The first is teaching and learning. Um, and there's a sense that what is going on now in classrooms and what is going on now as teachers plan for the work in their classrooms is that there's going to be there already are big disruptions. There's a sense that, well, I'm going to go to the second bullet here, that super flipped classrooms are a potential long-standing outcome or not too far into the future. Flipped classrooms is the idea that the traditional model of education with a teacher teaching during class time and then homework being assigned to amplify or to enhance what was happening in the classroom. The flipped classroom was imagined to be something that was the opposite, that homework itself would be the way students would encounter concepts the way they might have encountered them in good old days in classrooms. And then what would happen in classrooms, in flipped classrooms, is that teachers would be able, and the better students would be able to help students who were maybe struggling with stuff, and that problem solving and particular kinds of attention to classroom struggles would be enabled by flipped classrooms. Engaged learning is, a calling card from my place, Elon University, and in the sense that it has to marry now with artificial intelligence, and that there's going to be potentially a lot more project-based learning that will be occurring because you can use these tools, AI tools, in real time to complete tasks and do things that might otherwise have been maybe term paper assignments and things like that. The third bullet, language models in syllabi, is just there are lots of ways now, maybe even the scholars on this call are loading their syllabuses into to a language model and making it queryable by their students. At Elon, this is being done now by increasing numbers of faculty members who think that it gives students an advantage just to figure out what's going on and orient themselves to what they're doing. Also a way to anticipate what's in the future. Also a way to see connections between the lessons that are being done, maybe even to understand the connections that are made in the assigned readings for a classroom and things like that. Presence itself in classrooms is really interesting. Obviously, in the pandemic era, there was a lot more hybrid learning going on with in-classroom work as well as virtual work that was being done on screens. In the era where we now have these spatial computing devices on our faces, these goggles or these glasses or maybe these contact lenses are going to have them. There's a way in which the opportunities for learning might spread out to different kinds of classroom situations, not only just in the room itself, but also in shared experiences or on screens and things like that. And the content itself gets changed by these tools as you can transport students into learning environments that replicate historic places that existed or debates that have occurred on certain issues in the past, or project into the future, or to go different places on the planet and stuff like that. So there's a hope that this will enhance learning. Obviously, one of the big prospects of the internet era and now put on steroids in the AI era is collaboration and working in diverse teams. When I was at the Pew Research Project, we looked at for public attitudes about what skill sets were going to be important for the future. And working in diverse teams was the second most important trait that the public thinks next generation workers are going to need. The first priority they articulated was getting better at using computers, which is an obvious answer, and it covered a multitude of things. And then in the curriculum itself, I just wanted to highlight that there's a call now to us as educators to think about new literacies. One of the great things that universities have brought to the world is the sense that literacy, both in the classical sense after the printing press was revolutionized and made content much cheaper to produce, We are now going to have to learn all sorts of new ways to think about prompt engineering, using AI in assignments, to think about data and data stewardship. How do we remain private in places in the AI world where we want to be? How do we contribute our data to the other places in the AI worlds where we want? Obviously, prompt engineering is going to be the mega trait of the new age, as people are going to have to be ever better at asking smart questions and directing context environments for AI to address. And of course, another major thing that the AI has sort of galvanized people around is ethics itself. How do you prevent these systems from enacting bias? How do you encourage them to be inclusive in the way that they're processing information and giving answers in information? And of course, there's this big call for humans in the loop of all this technology, never letting it get fully out of human control. And so teaching to that and how that can happen is sort of a new call to those in higher education. I'm sure testing and grading, which is the second implication I'm highlighting here, has been on everyone's mind the minute they began to see students using these tools. I don't have particularly silver bullet kinds of recommendations to make here, but I think the whole idea of essays and term papers and things like that is obviously has to be reimagined, and systems need to be developed to prevent cheating. One thing that I've heard a lot, and I began to talk about maybe a year ago, was hearkening back to my days as I was studying algebra and trigonometry, and I'm of a certain age, where there were times when the teacher would demand of us students, show me your work, and you had to show how you got to the answer. And show how the process that you use to talk about the creative solutions you might have applied and things like that. My guess is that show me how you got to this final term paper, or how you got to this final conclusion in this essay I asked you to write, including showing me how you prompted the systems, what answers they gave, how you refined your prompts, what extra context you brought to your phrase. All of that now is potentially in play, because literally asking students to write essays now invites them to cut and paste stuff that AI generates. I'm guessing that oral testing is likely to grow now, rather than having other kinds of tests enacted. There are ways in which I think one of the most interesting developments in AI is going to be validation or certification of work itself and content itself. I mean, the creative community now has an enormous challenge to figure out how to verify that creative products are theirs rather than AI generated, or to spell out how much AI contributed to the system. But there are new ways to be thinking about authentication practices so that students can show this is really my work. AI systems, of course, enable real-time feedback on assignments, so you don't have to wait till you get your grade, or you don't have to wait for your office hours appointment with your professor to do that. There are ways in which these systems can give you immediate answers to whether you got the right answer, and immediate coaching or tutoring or mentoring to encourage you to think about another pathway to be getting the right answer and things like that. And I talked about documentation. I think when I was in the hiring business, when I was at the Pew Research Center, I was increasingly enamored of portfolios as a gateway into the capabilities and minds of job applicants. And I wanted them to explain how they did what they did, as they showed me content that they created and artwork that they created and projects that they had built and things like that. So my guess is that emphasizing portfolios will grow in the context of higher education. I think there's a big call now for micro-credentialing, as we have to sort of reevaluate our skills and capacities. That's just going to be a part of the system. Universities are going to be encouraged to do that. Those who want to pursue lifelong learning are going to ask you to do that and to ask you to certify their mastery of things. So I think that's well in your future. And then, of course, one of the great opportunities that exist for higher education in this era is to teach students how to be skeptical, teach them how to be red team members, teach them how to stress test the systems, teach them how to evaluate the output of these systems. And so I think there are new lines of assignments and even sort of full courses on that kind of stuff as part of the process. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about for implications was a mindset change where lifelong learning isn't optional for many people anymore. It's going to be obligatory. In the 2008, 2009 Great Recession, we saw in our Pew data for the first time, people are really doing deep dives into their own skill sets, whether their industry might survive another kind of financial uproar like the one that was going through the financial system at the time. And that reckoning now is sort of embedded into lots of younger people's lives, that they are going to have multiple jobs, that they're going to have to upgrade their skills and evaluate their talents a lot in the future. And the one thing I can think of here is that alumni offices and the relationship of universities to their alumni are potentially a way to treat them like long-running customers, that offering upgrades, offering those micro-credentialing opportunities and things like that might be a way to stay with your students for a much longer period than right now, the normal on-campus or hybrid experience that they are getting now. The other thing that we learned in our research at Pew was that thinking of yourself as a lifelong learner brought all kinds of other benefits into people's lives. And so it's just a way that people pursue personal and social enrichment. This is the way that they serve their personal networks, their friends, and things like that. And so that's important. You know what? I'm going to stop here just for the moment, because I want to make sure that I have time to answer questions. I've got some more slides about some of the big learnings that from our experts survey that we did. But Jeff, I wonder if you've been monitoring any of the questions and that there are things to address, or whether I should just plow forward.
Sure. There's a number of questions that have come up in the chat. So I'll mention the first one that came up was just when you speak about the percentages of the population. I think this was in the context of the technology adoption curve that you were showing.
Yeah.
When you speak about percentages of the population, how would you internationalize that? How would we spatialize the temporal story of adoption?
Yeah. Best I know, and I've followed this literature more than most, it is a global phenomenon. So just think of any kind of information. I'm bringing it up here in the context of AI and making the case, I think, that some of the dynamics of adoption are going to look like previous adoptions of digital tools. But the same traits of innovators and early adopters and early majority people, late majority people, and then laggards, they're fairly similar, and they play out fairly predictably as for other traits of the population. So, for instance, men are somewhat more likely to be interested in new technologies and embrace them than women are. It's obviously a big, gross generalization. Tons of women are some of the leading innovators. As a matter of fact, one of the recommendations of this literature is that if you want to get a community to embrace a new birth control method, a new method of planting, a new method of looking for wells, a new method of testing for diseases, finding the influencers in a community who are the doulas, the women, who are have super networks, are seen as smart elders in many cases. There are plenty of ways that women serve those communities. People with higher levels of education, higher levels of resources are also earlier adopters because they just have the wherewithal in many cases. And people who have not had a lot of formal education tend to be towards the right side of that curve, just because other stressors in their life are preoccupying them. Finding any kind of job, making sure that their family is fed and housed, and things like that. Those are some of the reasons why people are later adopters of technology. But this is a a quite robust set of findings that pretty much globalizes. I can imagine some certain cultural contexts where the script might be changed a little bit, but that's my sense, is that at least in broad strokes, the adoption curve looks like this in lots of places.
Great, thanks. There was another question related, this is again from Jeff Gilbert at American University of Paris, asking if there's any way of knowing how the people you spoke to arrived at their opinions. I guess just sort of, if you could talk a little bit about how you were, I guess, selecting the
Yeah.
um,
This is one of the challenging parts of being a pollster. Sometimes you want to press people for the reason they've given you the answers they've given you. Sometimes the best way to do that is to marry qualitative research with the quantitative stuff so that you can more richly have a conversation with someone about how, first of all, how they saw the question in the first place, and then why they gave the answer that they did. We didn't do that in these surveys, and so what I think a couple of things might be going on. First, obviously, they're trying their best to answer a question about artificial intelligence. My guess, though, is that they're also sort of bringing it in an environment where this stuff isn't deeply well known. I mean, there are lots of people who only have a limited sense of what AI is, and again, we had lots of those numbers of people saying they're not sure about what it is. And so they're bringing their values to these questions, and sometimes they're thinking about the current state of the things that we were asking about. So and Americans in particular are just really not happy about the election that's going to occur this year. They're not happy with their candidate choices. They're not happy with the information environment that they're faced with. They're not happy about the general dynamics that people deal with each other. So that vote of no confidence about AI and politics was also reflecting, I think, a general sense that politics is just an awful thing in the United States at the moment. And there are ways in which other data, particularly those related to education, sort of fit with other narratives that we're seeing in other kinds of polling data, where Americans are losing a little confidence in higher education and in K through 12 schools. And so some of that might be just a vote of distress, not necessarily specifically for AI and its impact, but just generally sort of thing. I don't like the way things are now, and I don't think that they're going to get any better in the future. But I think you've identified something that's really important here, which is we don't quite know how to apportion the variety of things that people brought to their answers here. What I think is certainly a takeaway that you can bank from these findings is that people have generally negative feelings about the things that they said so, and generally positive feelings about the things that they voted for in that context. And I wonder, maybe you can say in the chat and for next round of questions, are there particular wonderings that you have or interpretations that might be applied to those questions above and beyond the AI stuff that we were directly asking about?
Lee, I've got a list of other questions that have come up in the chat, but did you want to continue with your slides, or do you want to?
Well, yeah, I'm going to race through this. So it's going to be, and I apologize. I should have started by apologizing. I grew up in New York, so I talk really fast and I can't help myself. It's my sort of my metabolism. And so this is going to feel like an even worse sort of New Yorker, yelling at you and speed talking at you, but it's worth kind of thinking about. So we in addition to doing a public opinion survey on the things I've talked about, we also asked experts about what they think is going to happen by the year 2040 on a variety of things, including the listings that we gave in those data that I showed you. And, so the prompt was this thing: how will life have changed by 2040, given all of this stuff that might happen? And there are two big thoughts where we will have to reimagine what it means to be human. And I can't think of a bigger challenge and calling to the university community to engage in this question. I mean, every discipline I can think of on campus has its perspective on this. Why are humans special? And particularly in a moment where machines are taking over or mastering the kinds of things that used to be the sort of measures of intelligence and cognition that humans distinguish themselves from other species, and humans came to essentially dominate the planet because we had them. Now there's intelligence in the world that rivals ours and might in some cases overtake ours in the not distant future. So one of the experts we had in this survey talked about how the broad application of AIs in a large population means that everybody's going to be able to get their own answers on stuff and be able to mount their own queries and be able to increasingly have AI language systems in particular address their particular concerns from their particular perspective, knowing what these particular people have. Well, when this is all stuff that eventually ties to people's identities themselves. And if you have just billions and billions of people who get ever more customized information tied to their identity, reinforcing in some cases elements of their identity. The capacity of people to think about shared experiences and shared perspectives and shared even common traits is going to be a big challenge, according to Tracy Follows. And she talked about this as the existential threat to the next for the next century. And then we talked about it because human beings are going to change as dramatically, or being called to change as dramatically as the previous insight suggested. Societies themselves must restructure, reinvent, or replace entrenched systems. I mean, the common point was that the bureaucracies that we created in the pre-digital era are meant to serve certain purposes and meant to be involved in certain kinds of aggregation of information and analysis of information. Now that seems to be something that we can do a lot on ourselves. We don't need bureaucracies to do that, either government or corporate bureaucracies to do them. And so there's a sense that the institutions we've built for aggregating expertise, aggregating information, just generally to figure out what the patterns of the society are, those are going to have to change too. And so that lays three big questions. What are humans good for? And that breaks down to who we are. And I'm speaking from a really particular American context here, but I imagine this plays out in some way across the world. Americans, their identities are very tied to their work. And when you ask American who she is, who he is, if you might often get, as a matter of fact, it's pretty common to hear what they do for their work. And so what's going to happen when superior intelligence kind of does the work that now people get great meaning out of, finding great purpose in, and anchor their identity in? What we do, I've talked about the rise of co-pilots, and even the thing that's imagined now is that eventually we're going to have these co-pilots who represent us in the wider world. They make appointments in our name. They check out relationships in our name. So our agency and our autonomy are going to have to spread out. And how are we going to be thinking about that when we have a couple of sidekicks with us that are essentially supposed to be doppelgangers and have the rights and authorities that we do? How are we going to deal with that? How we connect and share. So the thing I highlighted here, of course, is the information challenges of the AI age, with misinformation, disinformation, information war being put on steroids on this capacity. And so our information ecosystem, as I say, is becoming polluted. How are we going to sort of work our way out of that? And finally, the marriage of this stuff with our cognition itself. One of the things these experts talk about is whether a portion of the population would just become enfeebled. I mean, they talked about the Wall-E, the wonderful Pixar movie where people have every problem solved for them and they have every need met immediately. Will they lose their capacity to feel like their own agents in the world? Will it even matter? Will they just default to giving what their AI systems give them? And so here are the things that I have just been thinking about as answering the question, what are humans still good for? These are a variety of ways that I think AIs don't yet measure up, maybe not ever will measure up. And so I feel like this is my early checklist of things that universities can be thinking about teaching to these traits, cultivating these traits, enhancing these traits, credentialing these traits, might be the pathway of for university work in the future. And I hold out at the bottom, what I think is the most mysterious trait of all, our consciousness, and even understanding that in the first place is a big challenge. So here's one of the visions of the AI community when it began to think that big advances, they were coming out of the AI winter, and big advances were on the horizon with neural networks and machine learning and stuff like that. One of the memes of that era, which I tried to create in DAL-E, was that we'd be lucky if the superior life form, the superior intelligence, the superior sort of being of one kind or another, you'd treat us like a pet. Maybe we would be kept well. We would be cherished for the sort of little things that we could do for the world, even by the superior beings that were our masters. So why don't I log off there, stop sharing there, and we can get to maybe the final round of questions.
Thanks, Lee. That was so dense. There was so much stuff. You
Yeah.
shared so much. There's a lot to reflect on. I think there was clear consensus that everyone wants to wake up in 2030 when AI can do our laundry, first of all. Let me just jump to another one of the questions that was a little bit earlier on. Let's see, Timothy Cleary was asking if you're doing any research into current student stress.
Yes. Yeah. It's a
given these trends.
One of the things that Elon did, even before I mostly came aboard, was to articulate 6 principles for leaders of institutions of higher learning to think about, and the sort of both the physical as well as the mental dimensions of this were something that we called out as something that needed a lot of attention. Obviously, the current moment is bringing its own stresses, long before some of the stuff I was talking about gets enacted in the world. And so, yeah, we are planning work in this area. There's a ton being done. There's a gigantic debate now launched by the new book by Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, about the anxious generation generated by the apps on our screens, particularly the iPhone and stuff. And so yes, and I, some of the things I was calling out, Timothy, were sort of related to that, and I think those are dimensions of that to go through. There are a bunch of in the psychology department on campus. Yes, that's a big part of it, and we're trying to make alliances with others who are thinking about this, because it's a top of mind issue. And at Pew, one of the things we found was that as people and experts were thinking about this, they actually thought that there would be a split in when it came to healthcare, that for mental health purposes, this stuff was going to be a problem. And addressing it quite conscientiously and seriously and immediately was important. But for physical health, they were thinking that some of the benefits would be relatively quickly developed as well. And so diagnostics, treatments, cures, personalized medicine, they were thinking that for physical health purposes, they would, health conditions would be eased, problems might even be cured. And so there's a split between the physical and mental health that was interesting to me.
And I forgot to mention this, but if you can, please go ahead and turn on your camera so we have a sense of presence as a group during the Q&A. And you can, in addition to putting questions in chat, feel free to use the raise hand feature under React, so that you can use your mic if you'd like. I'm going to take one more question from the earlier chat, and then I'll start running through the raised hands. So Alex Armstrong was asking, he was commenting on the fact that generative AI currently takes a lot of computing power, which has significant environmental impact. And he's asking if the Earth itself was, as a limiting factor, was considered in the experts' responses for upcoming AI milestones.
It's an obvious one to do, and the energy consumption issue is, just staggering related to this. One of the things that's so striking when you ask the sort of AI enthusiasts about this, one of their responses is that, downstream, maybe not long from now, AI systems are going to give us controlled nuclear fission. And so it will eventually get energy efficiency out of this. And there's some activity going on now in making the models more efficient, less energy consumptive, and things like that. But yes, I think we're going to be asking about that in our next surveys, because it's now top of mind. We're going to go through a long, hot summer, and people will be attuned to that, I think, in interesting ways. And so, yeah, that's a big part of the story here. And it's already obviously clearly on a lot of people's minds, and it's one of the big marriages of the wicked problems of sort of AI and its future and climate change.
And we're at the hour, but I think there's still a lot of questions people would like to ask. So if Lee, if you're willing to stay on for a few
Absolutely.
minutes to continue answering questions, and happy if everyone or anyone that's able to continue on the call, that's great. We'll stay on for a few minutes. So there were some hands that were raised, but it looks like they've gone down. So please go ahead and raise your hand if you've got a question you'd like to ask with the mic. Otherwise, Timothy, go ahead.
Hi, Lee. Hi, everyone.
Great.
Lee, fantastic presentation. Brilliant. Really
Thank
lovely.
you.
Exposed me to a lot of ideas I didn't really think about. I just wanted to say thanks also about the idea of addressing current student stress. Because, if you're delivering AI or AI concepts, students are suddenly refocusing what's going to happen on what's going to them 3-4 years from now. Have they got skill sets? And I think that this is undermining a lot of the young people. And just one other point I wanted to make. I'm ever so pleased that you focus a bit on, dare one say, elections and controls, and what are these systems having impact-wise on the political environment. So we had a referendum here in Ireland 4 weeks ago, where the government had its arse handed to it on a plate. And the day before, they had these state-run opinion polls, which was showing that the government was going to change the referendum with a majority of 4-1. And we got the reverse. And just, how big an impact are these unaccountable systems having on their way they want to run the world, as opposed to humanity's choices? Big one, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And so actually multiple things going on there. First, let me talk about a pain point that I've lived with for the past quarter century at Pew and at Elon is being a pollster. So one of the deep challenges that technology has brought before AI, but certainly worsened potentially by AI, is for one, figuring out who's going to vote. There are ways in which these systems are used to galvanize voters, and people who look like and had the profile of non-voters in years gone by all of a sudden show up at the polls. And so that's part of the issue. And in the United States, after the polling community didn't have a very good 2016 election where Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton, and the all consensus view was that she was going to win, was that a baked-in problem to lots of polls was they had too many well-educated participants. And education now has been, in lots of places, starting with the United States, a strong predictor of partisanship. It used to be that it was pretty evenly distributed across the board of educational attainment. There were predictable proportions of Republicans and Democrats with college degrees, with high school diplomas, who hadn't graduated from high school and stuff like that. And all of a sudden it became clear that the educated folks were more likely to be supporters of Hillary Clinton, not Trump, and that skewed a bunch of polls. So figuring out who's a voter is a hard problem. Figuring out the sort of new landscape of polarization, which is a global phenomenon, but particularly acute in the West, between populists and the more traditional elites. It's a really challenging environment. And so and government is often you said here that these were government supported polls. Government sometimes takes a while to adjust to whatever new realities are occurring in whatever fields there are. And the sort of changing composition of the voting population, the changing composition of what's to, what's to come is it's just not, governments aren't particularly well suited for that or organized for that. So, the word of advice maybe to teach your students is buyer beware. First of all, you have to see whether a poll is using whatever gold standard methods are employed by the polling community of identifying a representative population and a voting population. And even with that, sort of not banking your future on that outcome. I mean, so there's a longstanding worry from long ago in the phone polling era that poll results themselves change voter behavior. If you think your candidate's going to get slaughtered, maybe you don't go to the polls. Maybe you don't vote. If you think that certain kinds of people want a certain kind of outcome and you don't want that outcome, you go to the polls. And so, and now, of course, this is readily exploitable and even, built into some fake systems, disinformation, misinformation systems by just, muddying the waters. And I think for a lot of people in the sort of bad actors in the political community, one of the lessons of the internet era that's going to be applied very deeply in the AI era is the job of the bad actors is only to sow doubt, only to create doubt. They don't have to convince anybody to support their point of view. They have sort of won the engagement if they've created doubt in the mind of the people who have consumed their content, which might demoralize them, certainly would make them less inclined to get to the bottom of an issue that they wanted to explore because they might despair of being able to find truthful information and stuff like that. So there are a lot of reasons now that high skepticism is sort of the order of the day as these systems sort of roll out themselves, being skeptical about their capacities, stress testing them a lot, trying to red team them, trying to, applying your students to maybe coming up with clever ways to trick them and things to figure out where there can be jailbreaks. I mean, that's all for the good. And so maybe I'll stop talking with that, but yeah, it's a more confusing age and polls are part of the issue that's related to confusions.
So Jeff Gilbert has his hand up. Kate Roy had asked an earlier question that I didn't get a chance to get to. And so I want to give her, since she hasn't had a question yet. Kate, did you want to quickly get that question in?
Oh, if you think it's relevant, it was quite a specific question. I don't know, it might take things in another direction. It was about micro-credentials, just because it seems to be something that everybody's talking about at the moment. And it was about how you see micro-credentials fitting in the educational landscape.
Yeah, I can be quick on this, and it's thanks
of the future.
Thanks for picking up on that point. So badging, just certification that you've mastered a certain thing. And as these models roll out, of course, we're going to get different models. So maybe being certain the way Microsoft certifies and Google certifies about your capacities in those systems. I could see AI systems or universities themselves just saying, we're not going to teach you all of the skills and certify you on all the skills you're ever going to need on language models. But for the moment, for the mid 2024 moment, you're good at this if you go take this course and pass this test. So I can see that now becoming a regular sort of roster, thing that universities in particular sort of say, hey, we just seen this new thing in this field, and it might be biotechnology, it might be cognitive technology, it might be anything. This is this new thing. We don't know how long it's going to last, but if if important for you and your business, or important for you and where you want to go with your career, here's what we've got. The middle of 2024 to help you prove that you've got some knowledge in this area.
I think we've got time for one last question. Jeff, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thank you. So thanks a lot, and I'm a really big admirer of what you do at Elon. I'm afraid I polluted the chat with all kinds of nonsense, but I have a straightforward question just now, which is just as I'm trying to think about what we should be doing in the classroom, or what I should be doing in the classroom to prepare students for this. I know that the best translators who are good at using AI-assisted translation work have done a lot of work on translation first. And the writers who are good at using AI tools in their writing are those who have done a lot of work on the writing first. And those who are good about being skeptical about AI-produced results are those that have gone through some of the work of knowing how difficult and complex it is to get reliable information. So, and I'm not sure if I'm just being reactionary in thinking that a lot of things need to remain in place in education to allow students to face this properly. And I'm kind of nervous about a sense that the first thing my students need to do is spend more time with AI.
Well, yeah, wow, that's a big one. So obviously, first level mastery of the precursor stuff, the elemental literacy, the foundational ethics, the sort of core elements of even of math, is a good starting point. And then I think maybe the opportunity here goes in a couple of directions. First is maybe you don't have to be the master of all of this before you bring your students into the process. So in other words, I can imagine lots of people on the screen, God knows plenty of people at Elon just don't even, one of their big concerns is, I don't know this stuff. And so how can I teach it, or how can I embrace it in my classroom work? And I think one of the invitations you could make to students is, let's learn this together, or where where there are gaps in knowledge. Maybe that is a place to go and sort of say, I don't really get this. Who can help me with this? Or who, somebody, you're going to get an A in this course if you teach me something. You bring something new to me that I don't already know. The other thing, God, I am so far from a pedagogy expert, but my very amateurish sense is how people learn is just kicking the tires. Showing them what the first query they're going to do when they enter these systems is probably something very personal to them. They're going to query their name or their neighborhood or their significant other or whatever. And then you go from there. And so their natural curiosity and their natural, maybe now skepticism. I mean, inculcating that is probably a really good thing to do. And just sort of encouraging them to go out, and then having, particularly in these, not necessarily a flipped classroom context, but the next time they gather together, everybody brings an insight, or everybody brings their best insight or their best question about, why didn't this work for me? Or why is this doing what it's doing? Or how do I even know whether this is right or wrong, or something like that? And that becomes, the master teaching moment. At Elon, when I first got there, I didn't want to step on anybody's toes, but I'm pretty comfortable now sort of saying, you got to tell students to use this stuff. So there are a bunch of professors that were just sort of banned. It's a threat to me and my my scholarship, and it's a threat to what I know should go on in a classroom, with how lectures should proceed and how tests should proceed and how grading should proceed. And I don't think that's an option anymore. And one of the reasons, and I wrote it but didn't really say it very much, is one of the early slides, this stuff is now being built into the tools that are being used, and people don't know that they're using Gemini, or don't know that they're using the AI Copilot that Microsoft is offering. And so they don't have an option not to be using it. I guess they can opt out of it, or say not to use it and stuff. But soon enough, they're going to be seeing some classmates who are all in, or at least have given it a bit of thought and experimentation. They're just going to, my guess is they're going to feel behind. And they're going to, what happens on an adoption curve is, once some of the later adopters basically start hearing from the earlier adopters, this works. This is how it played out for me. Or isn't this funky that it does that? Or isn't it cool that it does that? And so it's the it's persuasion and convincing of others to get along with it. And at some point, when you're the last person in your network to know about something and to want to do it and to actually be a resistor, and that final friend says, I can't even be on a team with you for an assignment because you're not going to bring it to the final product. That's a moment a lot of people sort of cave in.
All right, I think we're going to have to wrap it up at this point. We're 15 minutes past the hour. Thank you so much, Lee, for this wonderful talk and the Q&A and exchange. Really interesting, wide-ranging, and so many interesting things to think about. I'll mention that one of the most interesting things I found about your recent report you've been talking about was this theme of we will have to reimagine what it means to be human. And with this group in particular of liberal arts-oriented institutions, it seems like that in particular is one of the points where our institutions and our colleagues have an interesting opportunity to work with students to help them engage with that question as well. So thank you so much for your time and everything you've shared with our group.
Wonderful to be with you. Thank you.